Among the green meadow stood two young men and several unusual small animals. One of them was the main character. His name was Kim Soo-ho. He was holding a white flag with his name in Korean and a shovel, but in this world, his name was Royd Fronter. He stuck a shovel into the ground and said that they would begin work in this place. From it, a round blue biofield began to spread across the earth, and soon spread to the entire earth in the area, right down to the trees growing in the forest. A grid formed on the blue field, and holographic multi-story buildings began to line up in the air. This is the story of an ordinary civil engineer who completely changed the world. Royd laughed and told the second man, calling him Gabriel, that all these lands would become money in the future. Gabriel asked the gentleman if he was crazy, because Fronter did not stop laughing triumphantly. It all started a few years ago. Kim Soo-ho, a Korean living on Earth, suddenly found himself in a fictional world. A taskbar appeared in front of him, on which it was written that the Absolute had chosen him, and he could make a wish. But at the same time, the magical system itself chose this desire for him and moved him into the world of a book novel. He opened his eyes and found that he was lying on the ground. The panel announced that he became one of the heroes of the novel, The Knight of Iron and Blood. It was literally the novel Soo-ho read last night. It seemed to him that everything was imagining, although he was not even drunk. And suddenly, he thought that this is the transmigration of a body from another world that often appears in web novel. But why did he wake up after falling to the ground? He rose to his feet and felt very cold. The panel turned red and announced that he had developed a crooked mouth as a result of sleeping on the street. Soo-ho hit the panel because he was annoyed by the tone in which it spoke. He straightened his mouth and finally realized and accepted that he had ended up in the body of the hero of the novel. But who did he become in The Knight of Iron and Blood? So far, it is only obvious that he was a man living in the village and sleeping on the road. At that moment, they approached him from behind and called him with the words, "Mr. Royd." The man said that he had been looking for him for a long time, and he finally ended up here. Soo-ho turned around, his gaze fixed on the hilt of the sword that was on the traveler's belt, and then on his blue hair, after which he looked at the man completely. It turned out to be the main character of The Knight of Iron and Blood, Gabriel Azrakhan. He told him that they should return to the mansion together. Soo-ho tensed. Gabriel looked exactly like in the pictures of the novel, and he just called him Mr. Roy. The sword master Gabriel, who as the plot progresses, becomes famous throughout the continent. This is his role towards the end of the book's plot, but at the beginning of the novel, he is just a knight guarding Baron Arcos Frontera, and the name of the Baron's eldest son is Royd Fronter. Soo-ho exclaimed loudly, "Did he really call him the naughty Royd Fronter?" Silence fell between the young men, and after a minute Gabriel replied that he only said his name and did not say that he was a prankster, and then he added that it was good that the gentleman assessed himself correctly. He looked happy and even chuckled. When they arrived at the mansion, Gabriel began to light a fire in the stove. While stirring the wood, he asked Royd if he really remembered how he ended up sleeping on the road, and then he himself reminded the gentleman that he had been drinking since dinner, broke all the dishes in the tavern, and then got homesick and eventually fell asleep on the road. The Baron was worried, and so he sent him, Gabriel, in search of his son. Even if the son is a prankster, the Baron will be sad if his son dies on the street, and even with a crooked mouth. Royd wrapped himself in a blanket and touched the cold floor with his palm. He thought that it would be nice to heat the floor, but then he remembered that he was in a medieval fantasy, at a time when heating had not yet been invented. Gabriel told the master to rest, and he planned to go to the Baron and report on his son's tricks tomorrow morning. Royd plaintively asked if it was possible not to tell, but Gabriel replied that it was impossible. Then Soo-ho thought that the night was impenetrable, like a wall. Before Gabriel left the room, Royd asked him how much light there was in their house. Gabriel sighed, did not answer these strange words, and slammed the door. Soo-ho knew the contents of the entire novel, because he, lying in a narrow room, finished reading the last chapter, and he knew Royd's fate. At the very beginning of the novel, the Baron and his wife fall for vile scammers, lose their entire fortune, and commit suicide. After the death of his parents, Royd begins to beg and drink non-stop. He then vomits blood and dies. Soo-ho threw off the blanket and exclaimed that everything was unfair. Even though he was given the chance to live as an aristocrat, he would still die a miserable death, the same worthless life as in Korea. The next morning, Gabriel brought Royd's mother, Manhwa Fronter, to Suho. She asked her son if he really broke all the dishes in the inn. The doomed Suho mentally replied that he literally read this novel last night. Mum asked her son to go to the owner of the inn today and ask for forgiveness. Suho thought that since this body committed the mayhem, he should really be held responsible. He scratched the back of his head and said that he would do as they say. Manhwa and Gabriel never expected that the stubborn Royd would agree to their request. They were very surprised. Together with Gabriel, Suho in Royd's body went to the village. Local residents, noticing him and colliding with the young gentleman's gaze, immediately tried to get away as far as possible. Everyone shied away from him, and even small children ran away from the windows of the houses and closed the shutters. The control panel told the guy that the villagers hated him. Royd asked Gabriel why he was walking next to him. The knight replied that the Baron ordered him to guard the young master and make sure that he did not repeat what happened yesterday. Royd asked if he needed to be guarded. Gabriel replied that on the contrary, the villagers should be protected from him. Realizing that Royd was a complete monster in the eyes of others, Suho thought that he first needed to clean up his image, so that at least someone would give him a piece of bread when he starts begging. Here was an opportunity to somehow sort out the family debt. Then he, as the successor of the village owner, would be able to live out the rest of his life in luxury. Pictures arose before his eyes of how he, being rich, would be swimming in gold. To make his dreams come true, Royd went into the control system to find some kind of cheat, and suddenly discovered that all this time some skills had been assigned to him. The panel said that he was a non-entity with a passive skill of the ability to make other people nervous. The second skill was alcoholism, and when used, he became a dog. Suho angrily hit the panel, but it immediately disappeared, and the blow fell on an empty space. Gabriel asked Royd where he had gone, and said that they were already there and standing near the inn. Royd must have known where they were going, and so the knight thought that he had deceived them, promising that he would apologize to the inn if he was going to move on. The aristocrat replied that he was just thinking. The knight was silent, and then Royd began to ask him what was the matter. Gabriel replied that it was nothing and told the gentleman to come inside. The knight noticed that something had been wrong with Royd since last night. It was as if he had become a different person. There was a real pogrom inside the tavern. All the furniture was destroyed into splinters. Royd sat down on a chair and bowed to the innkeeper with a sincere apology. But the man did not believe him and even took a defensive stance, fearing that they would attack him and start beating him. He put his hands forward and began to ask Royd to stop saying anything. Then Suho, inside Royd's body, thought that perhaps the man was even more frightened because a real non-entity was talking to him so respectfully. Then he decided to communicate in a boorish manner, in the style of a real Royd. With a dismissive tone, he said, "Sorry," and then the control panel reported that he was speaking in a manner inappropriate for an apologetic person. The tense innkeeper said that everything was fine, and the gentleman need not apologize to him. After that, Royd and Gabriel left and headed back towards the mansion. Royd said that even after the apology, the innkeeper's face was sad. Gabriel replied that it was not surprising. All the dishes and utensils were broken, and after all, they had previously been bought with money earned through sweat and blood. Perhaps if the gentleman compensated for the losses, the innkeeper would be satisfied. Suho thought that there were already only losses at home, and he could not pay the losses to other people. He could not even look good in the eyes of others. Until he sorts out his own debts, nothing will work out for him. Gabriel continued talking. He said that this is not the only thing that causes unnecessary worries for the innkeeper. Due to the cold winter, his mother's health left much to be desired. Suho thought that it was really cold in the inn, and it was impossible to heat the entire house with just one fireplace. It would be difficult for the old man to survive in such cold weather until they invent a heating system. At the moment of these thoughts, Royd suddenly froze in the middle of the road. A light bulb came on in his mind, meaning an idea, and then sparkled brightly. He recreated in his head a plan for a floor heating system under the house and realized that if he made it, he would be able to sell this long-known idea as something new in this world. The real fool Royd Frontera never even dreamed of this, but for the real Kim Suho it is possible. After all, he was a special civil engineer, and during his military service in the real world, he was able to build a house alone, and after the army, he worked day and night on construction sites. This is what he will do to cover the debts of the Baron's family. He turned around and told Gabriel that they were heading back to the inn. He asked why it was so urgent. Royd replied that he intended to receive his first order. The dashboard said that the start of his journey had now begun, and he could now earn points for interacting with other people, and should earn points. Royd, seeing the new notifications on the panel, wondered what RP were. Perhaps these mysterious scores were something like an experience he lacked an explanation for. He could get these points by improving relationships with characters. He turned around and looked at Gabriel, after which he noticed that a panel with some information also appeared near him. Gabriel's level of interest in Royd was indicated there, and the number was extremely low, or rather negative, and amounted to 30. Suho decided to immediately try to level up, and with all the charm he could muster, he told Gabriel that he was very handsome. The knight replied that he already knew that, and the number dropped another point down to 31. Then Royd decided to hold off on and not take any more risks. They arrived at the inn. Royd briefly explained what he wanted to do and immediately drew up an agreement on paper. He said that the customer was the innkeeper and the contractor was Royd Frontera. Construction costs are deducted from the amount of compensation for damage caused. After voicing these criteria for the document, Royd handed the piece of paper to the innkeeper for him to sign. The control panel indicated that the innkeeper did not trust Royd. However, this was already clear from his face, which was like stone. The skill of a spiritual wall emanated from him, and it seemed as if the innkeeper was impenetrable and was not listening to anything at all. Suho thought that he couldn't ruin his grand plan from the very beginning. He didn't want to use this method, but it seemed there was no other choice. He was forced to use the characterization of complete insignificance. With a sour expression, he said that they would often see each other in the village, so signing the agreement was in the innkeeper's interests, if he did not want to get into even more problems in the future. With pressure, he said that they must trust each other. This influenced the innkeeper, and he signed the contract. The control panel called Suho a real piece of trash, but he didn't pay attention to the nagging. He rolled up the document and put it in his coat pocket, smiling as he thought that the first contract had finally been received. Gabriel did not understand anything and only remained silent. They then went out into the inn's courtyard to build the customer a new house with underfloor heating. Royd immediately grabbed a shovel and was ready to start working right away. Gabriel asked the gentleman whether the fact that he blackmailed the innkeeper into signing a contract was arbitrary in his new trick. The aristocrat asked the knight if he really had no logic at all. Has he ever heard of cognitive distortion? Gabriel asked for the name of the term. Royd said that if it was like this in the past, it will be like this in the future. A distortion that occurs due to the fact that every brain cell is stereotypes and negative thoughts. Gabriel replied that it was not a stereotype, but experience and statistic. Then Royd asked, "Aren't experience and statistics a thing of the past?" The knight had no answer to this question, but in his thoughts, Gabriel wondered, since when did the young master express his thoughts so competently? Was he like this before? Suddenly Royd said that the innkeeper and his mother would smile and laugh with joy, and he began to dig, and then he energetically said that their smiles would become the foundation for his business. He began to dig a clear square around the perimeter, about 20 to 30 centimeters deep, and said under his breath that all he had to do was dig, move, compact, and repeat. Gabriel leaned against the wall of a nearby tavern and began to watch the process. Royd then took lumber from his mansion's warehouse and began building the frame of the house. He based it on a central wooden frame using traditional Asian construction techniques, which he learned while living in the real world in Korea. Then, he began to apply river clay to the frame, and soon the body was ready. His current aristocrat body was very weak and not prepared for long physical labor. He lay down on the ground to get some rest, but he didn't have much time. He wanted to finish the job as soon as possible. Gabriel touched the floor of the finished wall, which was at the third stage, and said that the gentleman completed everything quickly enough, although what happened now took him a whole week. The knight thought that Royd was really building something, but how did he know such technology, and why did he decide to honor the contract? He considered this impossible. Royd, meanwhile, stood up on his trembling legs. The next stage was the creation of boards for lining the clay walls. He picked up an axe and placed a log in front of him. He had absolutely no strength, and he somehow swung the instrument, and suddenly Gabriel came up and simply snatched the axe from his hands, asking what should be done. The aristocrat said that it was necessary to cut planks horizontally, 1 span in size, and vertically, 2 spans in size. The knight threw several logs into the air at once, and masterfully cut them with an axe, as if wielding his sword. The next moment, several of the necessary boards were already lying on the ground. Suho was amazed and gave the knight a thumbs up, thinking he was very cool. He then walked up to him and handed Gabriel a shovel, asking if he would help him with the digging. The knight was amazed and insulted that he was not thanked for the help that he had already indicated, and they brazenly demanded that he continue ploughing with him. He had completely forgotten about Royd's character and now regretted that he had decided to help in any way. Then the aristocrat, with a sly expression on his face, said that Gabriel helped him out of interest, confident that he, Royd, was planning to deceive the innkeeper in some way and intended to expose him. So, if he wants to see results, then it is in his best interests to help in order to quickly complete what he started. Gabriel thought that Royd had said the right thing. The aristocrat had been completely different for several days now, and this was very suspicious, and he can't trust him because of his very recent past. So Gabriel can only find out the honesty of Royd's intentions when they finish construction. He gave up and began digging the perimeter with Royd. After a few more days of hard work, Suho stuck a shovel into the ground, extended his other hand, and triumphantly announced that the construction was completed. The sign near the house depicted a symbol unfamiliar to Gabriel, a word in Korean. He asked Royd what the symbol meant. The young master replied that it was his brand logo, and then he told the knight that the time had come for him to check whether he had deceived the innkeeper. There was an opening on the outside of the house that resembled an oven. They put wood inside and lit a fire. Due to the stones, the flame did not set the house on fire, but at the same time, due to the hollow floor, it spread heat. The innkeeper and his elderly mother went inside the house and lay down on the floor itself. The woman was incredibly happy to feel such warmth. Finally, her old bones would warm up. The innkeeper couldn't believe his eyes. Is it really possible to build something like that? Suho thought that the people of this world could only be surprised, while in reality, such technologies are considered simple and created a long time ago. The elderly woman said that this underfloor heating system was comparable to magic. The innkeeper thanked the gentleman with all his heart and said that for the first time in a long time, he saw a smile on his mother's face. Gabriel opened his eyes in surprise. The innkeeper and his mother were smiling and laughing with joy, just as Royd had predicted, so he didn't cheat. What is it? In one morning, not only his speech pattern and facial expression changed, but he also worked hard and even fulfilled his promise. Did Royd really want to see these people's smiles? However, it probably wasn't that important. Gabriel saw that this family was happy, and he himself smiled a calm smile. The control panel informed Suho that Gabriel's interest level had increased 2 values up to 29. The relationship with the main character improved slightly, and for this, he received 36 RP. Royd turned to Gabriel and said that he was probably thinking about him right now, that he's not such a piece of trash. The knight denied this and did not comment. Suho said to himself in his mind that his first order was completed anyway, and even though he was completely in the red, it didn't matter, because he built this model house for advertising. A few days later, a whole line of villagers gathered at the innkeeper's new house. Each of them wanted to see with their own eyes and feel the already well-known heated floor. They left the house as if they were leaving a bathhouse, commenting to others that it was not just warm inside, but truly hot. Royd placed a table with papers next to the queue and began to lure the townspeople to sign contracts with them to modernize their houses so that everyone would have such a floor in their hut. Gabriel stood next to him as guard, but the townspeople were not very eager to sign the contract and bypassed the future baron. They did not believe that he built this house and did not trust him, thinking that he would certainly deceive them. Royd convinced them that he would do everything at a 10% discount and even showed them design drawing, but he was still refused. Then he again applied pressure and began to blackmail them into signing, reminding them that they would see each other on the street in the village every day. Suddenly, his father, Baron Arcos Fronter, accompanied by the chief's knight, approached his table. His interest level in his son was 20. He asked Royd what he was doing here, and he demanded to follow him. The baron forced his eldest son to dine with him at the mansion. Royd thought that all this time he had been very carefully avoiding his father, but he still caught his eye. What will he do if his father forbids him to build? At this point, the baron said that he wanted to listen to what his son had to say to him. Royd simply replied, that the innkeeper had placed an order for floor heating and he had fulfilled it. He said this in boorish mode, as if the real prankster Royd had spoken. The Baron concluded that he was now entering into agreements with other residents. The son couldn't help but sarcastically say that his father was already aware of everything. The man then said that these people are very valuable and therefore he asks not to deceive them. The young man replied that there was no need to worry about it, and in his thoughts he thought that, as he had expected, no one believed him. Having finished his lunch, Royd stood up from the table and told his father that if he had nothing more to add, he would go. The Baron asked his son if he did all this because of the current situation of their family. He had eyes and ears, and he probably understood everything a long time ago. The Baron asked his son not to worry and assured that he would definitely deal with such a trifle, so the son need not interfere. Royd just remained silent. He, like Suho, in his previous life in Korea, had already heard these words once. His father said that he would definitely pay off all his debts and his son shouldn't worry about it. He assured that there was nothing serious and Suho could study in peace. And he really believed then and thought that everything was fine, but it was a lie. And that's why he didn't want to become pathetic again because of someone's filthy money. When leaving, he told the Baron not to give up and he would also try for the sake of their family. Several years ago, he had to say these words to his own father. That's what he thought about as he walked out into the corridor. But then his thoughts were filled with more petty and earthly things. He counted the number of orders, which ultimately amounted to half the Baron's deposit. Suddenly, two men stood in the way. These were the moneylenders Mitrov and Silo. They didn't look at Royd at all and walked past him without saying hello. Apparently, these were the same people to whom the Baron owed a lot of money. They went into Arcos Frontera's office and asked since when would he delay payment. It had been more than 5 days since he was supposed to send them the monthly debt payment. The Baron just looked at his desk silently. He didn't have a single excuse. The moneylenders told him that if he continued to delay payments like this, they would not sit idly by. Then one of them asked Arcos why he was silent, as if he had taken water into his mouth, and he suggested the option that he could sell things from his estate in order to pay off the debt. Royd stood behind the slightly open door and listened. He thought that the moneylenders had come at just the right time, during the period when he was preparing to carry out his plan. He went to his room, and looking at the control panel, he thought that he had received some points by improving his relationship with Gabriel, which means they could be used somewhere. The panel indicated that by investing the points received in talent, you can improve your abilities. Suho was surprised that this system could still explain something normally, and at that moment it was written on the screen that nothing more would be explained to him for his comment. Then a loading icon appeared, and a blue circle formed under the guy's feet. The system began to scan Suho. Afterwards, notifications began to appear about the activation of information stored in memory, namely knowledge, soil mechanics, knowledge, hydrology, knowledge, structural mechanics, knowledge, water supply system, knowledge, design of steel and concrete structures, and others. They were not acquired. All this was Suho's knowledge from a past life. It was just that now they had acquired power through practice. The system itself was surprised that the young man knew so much. Suho replied to the panel that he didn't have to insert a word every time, and he was smart enough in college and even received a scholarship for good academic performance. Then a notice appeared that it was possible to improve skills based on existing knowledge, namely surveying, which required 15 points, and design, which also required 15 points. Suho thought that he didn't fully understand everything, but he had the right amount of points, so he invested them in skill. After clicking on Topographic Survey, Royd's eyes began to glow green. He screamed, either from pain or from shock and fear, and opening the window, he looked out into the street. It was late in the evening, but he could see everything well, and at the same time, he could visually apply a grid to the space, as when creating drawing, in order to immediately measure the perimeters by eye and select the arrangement of building. Now, he could easily scan any space. Field activated his second skill, and could now draw blueprints of buildings right in the air, on the screen, instead of spending hours doing it on paper. In the future, of course, it will be much easier for him, but will Gabriel's help alone be enough for him? Royd, imagining a powerful excavator in his head, thought it would be nice if he could summon heavy equipment. The system told him that it had something to summon, but it wasn't a technique. With the required number of points, the system could give him a random phantom. Phantom is a summon creature that served as an assistant for the player, who was only Suho. Each phantom has different skills and abilities, but acquiring one such assistant required 50 RP. Suho spent everything and only had 1 point left, so now he needs to diligently save and build relationships with the characters. In his head, he imagined huge dragons, magical horses like Pegasi and unicorns, terrible monsters, most likely phantoms looked like this. This means their strength will be equal to the heavy equipment from his world. He set a goal for himself, to get the goals of other characters towards his person. The moneylenders again came to Baron Frontera. One of them slammed the table and said that if he didn't have a penny, he could tell him a way to get money. He said that if Frontera sold his wife and children into slavery, he could get good money in return. Horror appeared on the Baron's face, and he asked the moneylender what he said. Did he really not hear? And then he said that even though he was a creditor, he still had to maintain decency. At that moment, Royd entered the office. He threw his arm over the shoulder of one of the moneylenders, and in the other, he held a large bag. The man threw the aristocrat's hand off his shoulder and jumped to the side, asking who he was. The Baron called his son by name in confusion, not understanding why he came and what he allowed himself to do. The creditor realized that standing in front of him was a naughty and problematic eldest son. He then asked Royd why he was interfering with the adult's conversation. Before the moneylender had time to threaten the guy to leave the room, otherwise he would get a lot of problems, Royd himself interrupted him and said that first he must show the invitation letter. Both creditors did not understand what was being discussed. The Baron's son said that the fundamental law of the kingdom, namely Chapter 3, Article 6, stated that all the aristocracy were subjects of the king and had the right to protect their interests. Entering the residence of the aristocracy without a letter of invitation is considered trespass, and this is contained in this article of the law. The men indignantly asked the young man what kind of nonsense he was telling them. They have never heard such a law. Then Royd said that if they don't know, then together they can check for the presence of this law, and then he called Gabriel to him. The knight went inside and asked Mr. Royd what needs to be done. He, with a grin, ordered him to cut off the hand of the intruder. The moneylenders began to shout that Royd had gone completely crazy and asked if he really wanted to sue them, and at the same time, they told Gabriel not to dare touch them. Royd said that this is why he suggests they check the existence of this law. Whose side will the court in the person of Gabriel take? He, as a knight, knew the laws of the kingdom better than anyone, and no one doubted it. Therefore, if Royd is wrong, then Gabriel will not carry out his order. However, the knight pulled his sword out of its sheath and swung it, intending to cut off the hand of one of the creditors. The moneylenders tried to escape, but headed in the opposite direction from the door, towards the table and window of the Baron's office. They did not admit their guilt and continued to shout at Royd that he was definitely making personal problems for himself, and they would definitely make him regret what he had done. Still, they managed to run past the two of them and close the door behind them with a loud bang. Royd called them insignificant with a pleased expression on his face. The Baron, very worried, asked Royd and Gabriel what they had done. How could they behave so brazenly and tactlessly in a situation in which they should have begged for leniency and been on their knees? Royd simply silently put the heavy bag that he was still carrying on his shoulder on the table. His face took on a very kind expression, and he said that initially he wanted to get the entire deposit and give it to his father, but did not have time to collect the entire amount. There was enough money in this bag to pay this month's interest. The Baron asked his son if he had really collected money from the villagers. Were they obtained through deception, and they literally robbed their own people? At this moment, Gabriel came to Royd's defense. He told the Baron that there was no need to worry about it. He will personally ensure that Royd fulfills the terms of the contracts he has entered into with the residents, so that the money is obtained through fair dealing and hard work. The Baron thought that Gabriel's face, which always showed the knight's honest emotions and messages, showed that he completely trusted Royd, at least in his mind. The Baron did not answer, and both young men bowed to him and left the office. Walking down the corridor, Gabriel asked Royd how he knew such laws, and he honestly admitted that he considered the gentleman a fool. He replied that he heard it somewhere, but in truth, he did not hear, but read, in the same book in which he was now located. And Gabriel himself said these words in the novel. In the story, after the Baron and his wife committed suicide, two moneylenders wanted to dig up their bodies from their graves and sell them. At that moment, Gabriel was near the graves, which was convenient. The enemies came to the place, and then the knight said that the fundamental law of the kingdom, Chapter 3, Article 6, states that all the aristocracy are subjects of the king and have the right to defend their interests. As he spoke these words, he cut their necks, and in court he was completely acquitted, since he acted on the basis of this law and defended the honor of the aristocracy. Now Suho, in Royd's body, thought that knowing the contents of the novel was a big plus. In any case, he should have already received a notification about the improvement of relations with his father, otherwise it could not be. He definitely should have been imbued with his son's help. Expectations were immediately confirmed, and the gaming system sent a notification that Baron Frontera's interest had increased by 6 values, and having improved his relationship with the main character, Suho received 60 RP. The total was 61 points. Suho smiled and said to himself in his thoughts that everything happened as they planned, and now he can get the Phantom. Wonder Beast, wait for your new owner.